I think a lot of people are familiar with the name JackThreads.
I was into having cool stuff and clothes, and I didn't have any money. There are off-price retailers out there for like every customer segment except young, cool guys. It was January 2006, I started writing that business plan. I didn't have any retail connections. The other piece of this, we had to build our technology from scratch. This was pre-Shopify. No e-commerce, no tech experience, and really no money. There's an Ohio State computer science professor. You pitch your project and he has the class build it for the semester. They picked my project.
Oh, fuck yeah.
I made it so the store was only open 3 days a week. People thought that was like a novel idea, but I did that because I didn't have enough inventory to be open 7 days a week. All of a sudden, it was just like a flywheel. In 2009, we did $1 million in sales. 2014, we hit just under 100 million. It was an absolute rocket ship.
What point were you thinking about exit strategy?
I had sold majority a few years earlier. There were so many things that I didn't even know to ask for. One of the partners called like the next day and he's like, hey, I want to meet every day at 4 o'clock, going from completely independent and free. And now somebody wants to check in on the work you did that day. Man, I don't know if this was the right move. Put the press release out there and then I left. I'd reach out quarterly just to check in.
You still have a chunk of the biz.
Yeah, and also it was my baby. All I would hear was, it's going amazing. We don't have time to talk. Well, I get a call 2 years later. Hey, do you want to buy the business back? They were going bankrupt. It was a lot of ego and emotion. I wanted my business back, hire somebody to run it, and then exist in the same way I'm existing in my other business, which is more advising. It was not that. I feel like, the perfect race, I think, is the half marathon.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is like, you don't have to train too hard. Race day isn't too long. It's, 2 hours maybe, but it's still a good challenge. If you run 13.1 miles, like, you did something that day, but it just doesn't kind of overtake your life like a marathon or ultra marathons would.
Is there a particular, like over a certain amount, over a certain distance, is it considered ultra? Like, is it over 50? Is it over 50 kilometers?
I think it's anything over a marathon. So it starts with the 50K, which would be 31 miles right in there.
Mm-hmm.
And then 50 miler. And then typically from the 50 miler, you go to the 100 miler.
Mm-hmm.
There are 200 milers now. And then there's the Moab 240, which is, that I've had a friend who just did it. Pretty crazy race through Arizona. That one scares me, honestly.
How long does that take?
I think it's days. Yeah, it's days. You have to have like a pretty sophisticated crew, nutrition strategy, all that stuff. And then there are these backyard races, which, do you know what a backyard is? So it's like everybody starts and you have to run 4 miles basically within every hour. In each hour, all the participants have to be back to the start line. And if you're not at the start line, then you're out of the race. So you just keep running this 4 mile loop until you can't complete it within the next hour.
Okay.
So there's a guy from Ohio that just did that and he ran 450 miles. So it's pretty intense. I've never done one of those, but I think it sounds cool and it sounds like a fun challenge.
It's 112 hours. Something like that.
Yeah. He just kept going. Like I said, you start, and if you run 4 within the hour and you're at the start line for the next hour, then you just keep going until there's one person standing.
You ever done that?
No.
Interested?
Yeah. Just to kind of see what it would be like.
Yeah.
But I don't know, man. I need to chill out on some of this stuff.
What's the longest one you've done?
100.
100.
Yeah, 100 mile race. So
one of those, or?
I've done 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've done 3. And it's awesome. It's like a spiritual journey, I would say, because what happens is you're out there and you're so depleted and you're so worn down and you're so tired that it just kind of reinforces what's important in life. You just start, all you're trying to do is survive and get to the finish and get good nutrition in you. And you've got your family and friends there supporting you. And any worries that you had going into it, it's like it all just disappears. So I've actually found it, and I didn't know this going into it, but I found it to be quite like a spiritual journey, because I'm like, I'll be out there from mile 75 to 100 and I'm just realizing that, man, I have everything I need. I've got my health, I've got my family and friends supporting me. I'm so focused on this race. I'm not worried about all the BS that I stress about in daily life. And I'm now reminded that doesn't matter anyway, So yeah, that was definitely an unexpected, I guess, little, I don't know, benefit of doing a race like that, but it beats you up though.
Yeah. What's kind of the worst injury, or what's the biggest challenge coming back from that? I mean, obviously toenails pretty common.
Yeah, your toenails get pretty dinged up. A lot of people will have just like joint soreness, right? Like knee issues, hip issues. For me, I have an ankle challenge. I broke an ankle during a trail run. So that same ankle seems to be the one that's kind of always the challenge for me. But it's always something typically, because you're just pushing your body so hard for so long. So
and you kind of get numb to whatever is off during the race, and you just kind of push through.
Yeah, because the first one I ever did, I had a pretty severe ankle issue going into the race. I'd get up to maybe 20 miles in my training runs and I'd be limping around. Like it was that. And it had me nervous because I had trained so much to run my first. I thought, is this going to even happen? Right? Like I thought I was injured. And I was working with a physio and she was helping me strengthen all these things that would support that. But funny enough, I got to the race and I got through mile like 25 and it was bothering me like crazy. And I wrapped it up. My mom was there. Actually, she was helping me. Like we wrapped it up and I went out on the second loop, another 25-mile loop. And this bandage is now like driving me nuts. And I just tore it off. I'm like, fuck, I got to just figure this out. And something happened where I just happened to realize that I had run 10 miles and I hadn't even thought about it. I'm like, oh my gosh, like it's kind of gone. It almost just got like my body just got like numb to it. It was incredible. And I never thought about it or experienced any pain from it for the rest of the race.
Wow.
So that was pretty eye-opening for me, that this thing that I had all this fear about coming into the race that was nagging me in the early part of the race kind of just went away. I don't know what or why.
Is it the body's natural ability to not, I don't want to say heal, but to like send the necessary, if hormones is the right word. I'm struggling with the biology right now, but to the spot to numb it. And, maybe just because you got in that space mentally that the body took over and you weren't ruminating on it. Right. I mean, that's kind of almost what you were talking about before. Like in our daily life, we just ruminate on these things.
Yeah.
And when we are faced with survival, it's funny. We were talking about, my Route 91 Las Vegas experience, and like you're just faced with survival and all those things that you work so hard to achieve and accumulate, and the things that are just you think are so important and that make you are gone, and they're not there. They're not helping you in mile 75 through 100.
Nope.
At all.
Yeah, you kind of realize you have everything you need. And I don't know, for me, it also makes me a little more grateful in life because through those experiences, I'm more aware of it. So it had a lot more benefits than, just the kind of the grit that it gives you to have that mental toughness to get through the training and then the race. But then also to have those reminders about just what's important in life is pretty, purifying in a way.
Yeah, that's right. I think you could go into that. Like I know when I ran marathons, like it was more to challenge myself. Can I get through this, competition, race, whatever.
Yeah.
And to have the benefit of getting into like a deeper level of consciousness about why we're here and what's important. And, it makes me think about this. I heard just sort of this on a podcast earlier today. Like the guy was talking about, shit that he was worried about 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. He looks back, he says, none of that came true.
Yeah.
Like how many of the things that we worry about on a daily basis just never come true?
I think it's probably most of it,
yes.
Right? Just like that guy was saying. I work with a therapist and she always is like, the brain is hardwired to focus on the deficits. So deficits, I think when you're focused on it, it leads to worry and anxiety. So I always try to think about that too. It's like, it's so easy to bypass all the good and the things that are like, super important in life and just hone in on all these things to worry about. But it's probably, just a really good practice to just be aware of that and remind yourself of just things to be grateful for. And it comes from these races for me and the experience that you had. But it's wild. It takes that,
Yeah. And it's like, how do we, when we're in that ruminating stage, like how do we pull ourselves out of it, zoom out and be like, just, like everything is okay right now.
Yep.
I'm worried about impending doom around the corner. And I'm thinking about all these different ways it can happen.
Yeah.
And then upon reflection, it never happens. And so when I find myself there, how do I shift? Like, does your therapist have any strategies for like, when you find yourself, it's funny. I had seen this thing on the internet on Instagram, and it was this whole, there's like a meme of someone lying in bed, and at the end of the bed was, this like kind of monster. And he's like, basically like, you're starting the day at a deficit. So like, what are you going to do to, make yourself worthy of having this life and earning love and all that. And I just, that resonated with me like, oh fuck, like, not that I'm super industrious every day, but I've gone through periods where I feel this need to do stuff, accomplish, achieve stuff. So they feel like that I am worthy of anything good that happens.
Yeah. I wouldn't say, I think a lot of the work that we do is, it's kind of like just she'll meet me where I'm at in that day and help me process kind of whatever's going on in life at that time. And I think she's helped a lot with just having grace for myself and knowing that sometimes in those moments when you're worried about certain things, kind of the quote that I shared is one, just sort of just making the human experience just making me feel okay that like a lot of people are going through that, but also it's information too. And just understanding when you're feeling a certain way or thinking a certain way about things, just trying to separate those thoughts from yourself and then looking at it as information, like it's maybe guiding you in some ways away from things that maybe you shouldn't be spending time on or worrying about and towards things that, fill you up. So aside from the obvious stuff that we do, meditation practices and that like mindfulness work that I think is helpful in these situations too. It's a lot of, what I just explained, but I've been with her for 5 years and it's been super, super helpful. Like I get a lot of peace when I go in there and when I'm leaving.
What inspired you to seek her out?
Well, I was actually going to her because my marriage was ending. And I was in a 10-year relationship and we actually went together to try to get the tools to make improvements in our relationship. And, ultimately that wasn't the path my wife wanted to continue to go on. And I totally understand, but I just found benefit in it. So I just started going myself. And it's 5 years has gone by pretty quick. And we have a great thing going. I've learned a ton about myself and just about different practices to navigate, through life and the ups and downs and the trials. And I met my therapist when my marriage wasn't working out and COVID happened. I had this amazing dog that died, cancer, got the dog at like 5 years old. And that was kind of my buddy through COVID. And then I bought my old business back, which we can get into all that too. But it was just a lot of like challenging periods that she has been with me through the whole thing. And it's been just an invaluable tool, as I'm navigating through a lot of these challenges and not just dealing with the challenges, but recognizing and getting a better understanding through her of the behaviors and patterns that, got me into these places in the first place. So.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's back up a little bit. First off, so you and I met in the spring.
Yeah.
We were at the Morgan Hoffman Foundation Golf Tournament at Ohoopee, and it was like an amazing tournament. But
amazing.
You were one of the first people I met there. and we didn't know each other at all.
No.
And I was telling you this on the ride in, that just like your openness and kindness and your heart. And I was like, who is this fucking guy? He's like super cool. There's just something about you. And then I was with Lance in college, and we all kind of were talking later, like, this, you got to meet Jason. Like, he was awesome.
That's awesome, man. I appreciate it.
So we ended up
saying the same about you guys, obviously.
Oh, look at you.
You know what's wild too? I think I told you this that night because we were sitting next to each other at dinner.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no idea, but I had just in the last 2 months listened to your podcast with Lance.
Oh, yes.
But I didn't know that it was you.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know you were the host, the guy sitting next to me. And we were just talking. And at some point, I kind of put it all together. So it's just a funny little thing that, listening to that, not having any idea I was going to meet Lance or you. And then all of a sudden I'm playing golf with you guys and I'm sitting next to you at dinner. It just is, I've had a lot of things like that happen to me over like the last 10 years, but that was like one of those cool moments. I'm like, this is crazy. And it just meant to be that, we're here now. So.
Yeah, it was cool. And then we were kind of doing some workout stuff while we were kind of on our little golf trip. And I didn't really feel like working out that next morning. And they had an amazing property. Like, hey, let's go for like a bike ride. So you and I went off on our bikes for 45 minutes or so.
Should mention too, I mean, we're on a golf trip. Like, it's pretty much when you get down there, it's kind of endless. Like, you pay to have, it's all open bar and everything you want. So guys are having fun.
Yeah.
And we had this idea to get up at 6:30 the next morning to go work out. So I was pretty convinced that when I came out, no one was going to be there because I didn't know you guys. You know? And so, it was awesome. I walk out, there you were. Here we are.
And so we got to know each other. Like, it was super cool. And I think I said early on, I'm like, dude, I would love to have you come to Austin, obviously come on the pod, play some golf and hang and, kind of, so that's how our relationship started. We stayed connected over the last several months.
Yeah. Probably 7 months ago was the tournament. So
I'm still struggling through the same things I was struggling through back then. We are. Yes. But you've had a lot happen, particularly recently in regards to your old company.
Yeah.
I think it'd be interesting to start with like the old company when it was the new company, and I think a lot of people are familiar with the name JackThreads. And if they aren't, like, would love to just, how did it happen? I mean, you shared with me the story and I thought it was just so fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, I went to Ohio State, got a finance degree, and then just really, I never got a job. When I was at school, I remember I was home. It was holiday break and I found Inc. magazine. I didn't know anything about like entrepreneurship, starting businesses. I know when I was 16, my mom always talks about this. I was a dishwasher at a restaurant in my hometown. And I remember the owner of that business would come in, like, he was never there. And then when he was there, he would be like in this room counting all the cash. So I'm like washing dishes, and I'm like doing this nasty job. This guy's never in there. But when he comes, he's in this back room. He barely spends any time. He's got these wads of cash he's counting. And I was just like, I want to be that guy.
Yes.
I don't want to be working for that guy. I want to be that guy. So I think that bug was always in me. And I had family members too that were entrepreneurs and business owners. And so it was somewhat in my family, but not until college. I found Inc. magazine. I was home on Christmas break and it was the .com boom was going on. And I was just fascinated. I got all these young guys building these businesses on the internet and, making a lot of money, which as young men, that's what you want. You want to have success. You want to make a lot of money. And I went back to Ohio. I was at Ohio State at the time. I went back from winter break and I was walking to class and there was a flyer out for this event called the Entrepreneurship Spectacular. Kind of a funny name, but caught my eye. And I thought, man, I just found Inc. And now I see this flyer. It's kind of meant to be for me. So I go to the event and now I'm immersed with all these kids that are into entrepreneurship and business. And so really through that, I decided exactly what I wanted to do in life. And for the final 2 years of my college, like I was kind of had my blinders on that's what I was going to do. So I left Ohio State, never got a job, just jumped right in. And my first business didn't go that well. It went well that we made money and we were able to pay we gave our investor a good return, and he's somebody that I'm still friends with today, have a good relationship with him. But it was like a 2-year journey in a business that never wrote a business plan, wasn't really passionate about what we were doing. And it just, at the end of 2 years, I was looking in our bank account. I'm like, look, I've got enough money to double this guy's investment. So we can do that and shut down, or I can keep going. And like, I'm not waking up excited every day to get out of bed. I'm going to lose all this money.
Yep.
So I called him and I was like, hey, we're done. We wrote him a check. He wasn't happy that we were done at the time, and I understand.
What was the business?
It was a sports marketing company. So that was kind of my first venture into owning a company, learning the ins and outs. I never wrote a business plan. We were in a commoditized space. It wasn't something that I was passionate about. And so when I left that experience, I had enough money to live for a year, but I mean, like, live like in poverty, basically. I had enough money to, I was in my mid-20s. I don't have any obligations. So I was able to just pay my cheap rent and eat cheap food and have my freedom to pursue what was next. And so I spent the next year looking for what the next thing or business idea or project for me to pursue would be. And that turned into JackThreads. And so I'm a young guy. I was into having cool stuff and clothes. And as I shared, I didn't have any money. So I was going around to all the thrift stores and the secondhand stores in Columbus and sorting through the racks and just try to find cool stuff. And then I would go to TJ Maxx as well and just sort through all the stuff that was there to try to find something cool for myself. And oftentimes I would find things and sell them on eBay. That was a way I was making money. But I started to realize that there are off-price retailers out there for like every customer segment except young, cool guys. And I thought, why isn't there a store that's buying all the closeout stuff from all the cool brands for men and curating it and just, like that to me seems like it should exist. And it also happens to be a passion of mine because I'm doing it on my own, not really making money. It's just like a genuine interest that I have. So that was kind of the light bulb moment. And that was 2006. It was January 2006. I started writing that business plan. And then 2.5 years later, we launched. So I didn't have any money. I didn't have any retail experience. I didn't have any retail connections. I worked for my uncle who had a construction remodeling company. He would let me come and work whenever I wanted to work. So I had freedom to pursue my business. I worked as a bar back. So I worked at night. So I had my days free. And then, and I was just trying to get by. Oh, this is kind of funny. So this was pre-2008, the financial crisis that, the housing meltdown. I bought a house. So crazy story. Back then anybody could just like walk into a bank and get a mortgage, which is the reason the whole country collapsed. So I'm a young guy with no job or anything. And I went and I bought a foreclosure property and I rented the rooms out to friends of mine. So I was basically living for free during that time. So that with the jobs that I had allowed me the freedom and, the ability to kind of keep pursuing this business. So it was a crazy, 2.5 year journey to launch. Again, I had no retail connections. So I would fly up to these trade shows where all the brands would present in New York or Las Vegas. And I'm a total nobody, don't know anybody there. And I remember the first one I went to, it was in New York. I walked in and I looked around and I walked right back out because I was just so intimidated. Like everybody had all the best style and they all seemed like they knew one another. And I just was like, man, I felt like such an outsider, but I had paid money to fly up there. And I just kind of went outside, did a little pep talk with myself and walked back in and just went booth to booth and just started pitching people on my idea. And that first trade show, it was pretty brutal. Like nobody wanted to talk to me, but these shows happen every 6 months. And so what I found was that I kept going back. And then I wasn't the new guy anymore because I started to meet people.
Okay.
And finally, I had enough brands who were like, look, bro, you've been talking about this for like 1.5 years. If you just build the business, we'll work with you. Like clearly you have a dream, you have drive, you're here, we'll work with you. And part of the reason it was taking so long was that this was pre-Shopify. So again, I had no retail experience, no e-commerce, no tech experience, and really no money. So I'm working to get by, as I shared, and I'm going to these trade shows to build the retail relationships and get that retail experience. But the other piece of this was we had to build our technology from scratch.
Oh, you're saying so Shopify was just an easy e-commerce platform?
Yeah, like Shopify transact. Today, Cal, if you or I wanted to start a business, an e-commerce business, we could probably have it up in like 20 minutes.
Yep.
Back then, you had to build the whole thing from scratch. So I was trying to figure out that process, again, with having no money. So I was trying to pay local developers who are freelancers to kind of get things moving.
Oh, shit.
And it was a lot of starts and stops and starts and stops. And I tried offering people equity and they'd get excited about it and they'd work for a month and then just disappear because, I'm sure they started having thoughts like this thing's never going to be anything.
Yeah.
Well, I can't remember exactly how this happened, but I found out that there's an Ohio State class and there's a computer science professor that he will take on outside projects, like outside real world projects. So you come in, you pitch your project and he has the class build it for the semester.
Okay.
And it's all free.
Yeah.
So I find out about this and I go pitch the class.
Yeah.
And they pick my project.
Oh, fuck yeah.
So I basically got a full semester of these Ohio State students working on our technology. When the class was over, 2 of them were graduating. I hired them.
Yeah.
They became my developers and they got us to the start line.
Oh shit.
So we launched 2.5 years later. This is July of 2008 now. Turned the on switch. Day one, we got 3 orders. It was three of my friends, nobody, nobody else. It's crickets.
Yeah.
And so this was the early days of.
How would people find you like on day one?
Good question. I have no idea. Yeah. I don't know. I wasn't doing any marketing. I was just like, again, our marketing strategy was you don't have any money, you better get scrappy and figure it out.
Yeah.
So this was the early days of blogs. So blogs were like the podcast of that time, 2008.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing about them and I would try to reach out to a few, but I'm just kind of a little preoccupied with other things that we were working on. And I had a friend, one of my friends or somebody reached out to a blog one day and told them what we were doing. And I remember that morning myself and I had hired a developer. A developer was on our staff and we were in the office in the morning and he's like, bro, like we've had like 500 people sign up to the site today. And I'm like, this has to be like some kind of spam, right? Or some kind of spam attack or whatever it could be. I'm like, there's no way this is legit.
500. And what was the daily trickle at that point?
It was like nothing.
Yeah.
This was like 2 months in.
Yeah.
So barely anybody was signing up. And all of a sudden, 500 plus people had signed up. And so we're a little confused, wondering what's going on. And we start looking at the email addresses. They're all legit. It's like so-and-so at Nike.com, so-and-so at Apple.com, so-and-so, like real legit email addresses. So we start reaching out to a few of them because we're just like, how did you find out about us? And I guess a friend of mine who had reached out to this blog, they picked up the story and they had a following.
Yeah.
That following, they signed up. All of a sudden, our products start selling. We had and this was the early days of referral systems. So you invite your friend and we'll give you $10 if your friend buys something.
Oh.
All of a sudden, it was just like a flywheel. And so month 1, I had 3 friends that bought. Month 2, I think we did $1,000. Month 3, it went from 1,000 to 5. By month 6, it was 30,000 a month. Month 7, it was 50. So again, we launched in July of 2008. In 2009, we did $1 million in sales. 2010, we did 4. 2011, we did 20. 2012, we did 40. 2013, we did 80. In 2014, we hit just under 100 million in sales. And it was an absolute rocket ship ride of my life. And yeah, it was just a crazy journey.
Okay, so in the beginning, how many brands did you sign on to sell their what would you call it?
Just like the closeout product.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I was going to these trade shows, and in the first 2.5 years, got 6 brands to agree to work with us.
Mm-hmm.
So 6 brands is not a lot of inventory. So what I did was I put a sign up wall on the site to make it seem like when you signed up, you had to get approval to get in to see the deals. So it made people feel like it was a little bit more like there's just like scarce, right? Like,
yeah,
it was almost like a club that you had to be a part of.
Or we might sell out of some shit.
Yes,
yep.
Exactly. And then I made it so the store was only open 3 days a week. And people thought that was like a novel idea, but I did that because I didn't have enough inventory to be open 7 days a week. So we would open on Tuesday night at Monday night at midnight. We would launch a new product Tuesday night at midnight, launch another one Wednesday night at midnight, and Thursday night at midnight it would close and it would reopen again. And that's how we were doing it. And what I found was that the brands loved the model because it kept their off-price product, which was available now online at half price, but it kept it very discreet. And we made sure we shot the product really well. We would always, before it would go live, show them the pictures. So it was really a partnership.
Oh, cool.
And what I really learned, which is obvious, but the industry is very small. And we got those 6 brands, but we treated them like royalty. We took care of their product. We made sure they were part of the process. We paid our bills on time. We styled everything really well. We didn't bring on brands that when their brand was sitting next to somebody else that might devalue it.
Yep.
That,
kept it at a certain level.
We kept it at a certain level.
Mm-hmm.
And they really appreciated that. And so the 6 brands who know everybody else in the space, 6 went to 12, went to 24, went to 36. And we had an amazing reputation in that industry for, as long as I was running it.
And so if a shirt, let's say a shirt retails for $50 and you're selling it for 25,
yeah,
what are you paying for it?
So we would pay it at most $12.50.
Yep.
Yeah. So we were always trying to, at least, it's called Keystone is the term. You double the cost to get your margin, but you want to buy it for cheaper if you can. So the way to do that is take on more inventory risk or clear people out of SKUs that they want to get rid of versus being a more picky. If you're picky, you might only be able to command a certain margin. If you take more risk, you can get some better pricing.
And I guess the way things were going, you probably didn't get stuck with much inventory, right?
No. Yeah, we were surprisingly, because that would have been the death spell at that point in the journey if product wasn't selling, because I was doing this with an SBA loan. So I had basically the government, the SBA is a government program, gave me a credit card with an $85,000 limit. And I kind of, to myself, made a promise. I'm like, I have a finance degree from Ohio State. I'll risk $85,000 because I know if I lose it all for whatever reason, I can go get a job. It's going to suck, but I can pay that off.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that wouldn't have worked out is if the product wasn't selling. So we were just really diligent about the brands that we were taking on and making sure you couldn't find that product, at any other stores at the prices we were offering it. And we were very cautious about the levels that we were buying at. And, as the audience grew, of course, those inventory levels grew, but we started to feel it out.
Yeah.
And it was in the early days more risky, but here's one thing that I figured out like about 6 months in. This was a big turning point for us. So I can go to a brand and I can buy 500 shirts from them. And let's say that brand has 1,000 of those shirts. So they're still sitting on 500. But I only bought 500 because I'm trying to manage my inventory levels. Well, say I put those 500 shirts up and they sell out in 15 minutes. That doesn't do me any good or the brand, right? Because that's telling me that I could have probably sold all 1,000 of them.
Yep.
If they sold out that quickly, I should have bought more. So as I was seeing this happen more often, I changed my pitch to the brands. And I went to them and I said, you have 1,000 shirts in your warehouse. You can have me decide what I think I should buy, or you can allow me to sell it before I take ownership of the product, and let's let my customers decide. Because what I found is that a lot of times we can sell way more than we think. And then you're sitting on inventory and then we're losing out on revenue. So we termed that a pre-sale. And I started negotiating these pre-sale deals with all of our suppliers. Well, then this turned into a cash machine because I didn't have any cash outlay.
Yeah.
I'd lock in the pre-sale. I'd run the sale. I'd get all the money from the customer and then I'd stroke a check for half of that money because for the margin, right, to pay for the goods. And typically we wouldn't do that for 30 days. So I was able, without raising any money from any investors and using an SBA loan, to kind of flip the risk on its head and use it to our advantage. And we rode that pretty far until I would say the demand we created started to outweigh what the off-price industry had to offer. We had to start making our own private label product and working with factories. And
really?
At that point, you had to start paying up front and the pre-sale deals started to run their course a little bit. It also wasn't the best for customer experience because oftentimes the brand would say they have 1,000 shirts and then you'd sell 1,000 and they'd ship you 950. And we'd have to go to those 50 customers and say, hey, we're really sorry. Here's a credit. And you have a customer service team that has to do all that work. So it was a little challenging, but it was key in that sort of risk phase to navigate around it and create just a way to survive, when I didn't have any money.
You created your own private label, like you had your own clothes?
We did. Yeah. So as that business evolved, as I mentioned, we got to know that customer really well, right? Because we started to build a big business. So we know who they are. We know what their needs are. And it just got to the point where the demand that we had created, the product in the market that matched the needs of our customers, it just wasn't big enough.
Yeah.
So if I know this guy needs black joggers and he's going to buy them all day and none of our brands have them, we've got to go fill that demand gap. And the way that we did it was with our own private label brand. So we did it very similar. If you go into an Urban Outfitters, this might be the easiest example. They have Vans and all the skate and streetwear brands, but mixed in with all of them are maybe like 10 house brands. You might not realize that they're house brands, but just being in the industry, like I know that, or we know that. So that it was the same strategy. So we had maybe 5 or 6 different brands. One of them was more of a denim brand. One of them was an active brand. One of them was more contemporary. One was more edgy streetwear. And we used each label to fill those demand gaps. And the margins were amazing.
How long would it take you to turn around, say, a product where you're like, all right, we need black joggers. How soon could you come to market?
It's about 90 days.
Yep.
And then if you have some type of unique advantage with a factory, you might be able to get it to 60. Some people can pull off 30 if it's maybe domestically made and they've got fabric sitting at a factory and they've got just a really good relationship with that said factory. But it's typically, 90-day minimum.
And so who's doing the forecasting on what is going to go into that private label? You say the customer, but how do you figure out it's black joggers or?
It's a mix of our merchandising team, their shopping trend. So we would go to Tokyo, we would go to Vegas, we would go to LA, New York, and just shop and just see what people were wearing. We're using that to test stuff on our site and we're seeing what our customers are buying. We're watching what our competitors are doing. So it's a mix of that. And then it's our marketing team who's in charge of demand, right? The traffic and the inbound. So they're looking at traffic and conversion rate of that traffic. And then it's our planning team, our inventory planning team, who's looking at inventory levels and sell through. And you're trying to marry the two. So the inventory levels that you take on, you want to make sure that it's not too much, that the demand that's coming in, can't buy enough of it. So you're sitting on inventory and having to liquidate it like the brands that we're buying from we're having to do.
And what does liquidation look like for you
It's similar, but it's more in bulk.
Yep.
So we would have partners that there's a term for them in the industry, but they would come in and just buy in bulk. And we would just ship pallets. Sometimes it'd be overseas. Sometimes you'd send it to TJ Maxx. We didn't have to do that a lot. We would also run warehouse sales on our site. We would do them, you could do them live as well. We did that from time to time.
Okay.
But typically, traditionally, the way retailers would do it would be, selling to a TJ Maxx or jobbing it out to somewhere overseas.
Okay, so if in 2014 you were just around 100 million, at what point were you thinking about exit strategy and like peeling this thing off, cashing out, and I think what a lot of us are led to believe that that's what you do when you have a brand. You build it up, you get the revenues up, and then you sell it, and you have a big payday, and you ride off into the sunset.
Yeah. So in that journey that I just shared with you, I sold majority along the way. So at 2014, I had sold majority a few years earlier. So I now had private equity partners at the table, and I was essentially running the business for them. I had a big chunk of the business, but I was running it for them and had a job. And I also I was in the boardroom at the board level, but I did not have control over the decision around when to sell and when to receive liquidity. So I could share my opinion with the group, but ultimately it wasn't my final say. So I really had a job at that point, and I left right around that time.
So did you start with 100%? Did you have any partners early on?
No partners, 100%, no investors.
And so then was private equity the first piece where you chopped off a chunk for them?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And then what did that look like? What percentage was that?
So I sold 2/3 and I kept 1/3.
And that was in
late 2010.
Yeah. And what was the thought there?
The business I built was in a space that became probably the hottest thing in e-commerce at the time. So the business model, and it was called the flash sale model. So again, we were taking this product and flashing it online for 48 hours and then it was gone. We just happened to be doing it for guys. Yeah. So all these competitors.
Gilt, was it?
Exactly right. Gilt was the main one. Yeah. Kevin Ryan, who's a pretty well-known founder and entrepreneur, was behind Gilt. And so I'm this kid in Columbus, Ohio, that started this business with fully bootstrapped, Gilt and Hotlook and Rulala and Ideally and No More Rack. These guys were raising hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yes.
And now they're starting to call me because they're like, hey, what's going on over there? Do you want to partner with us? We want to learn more about your business. And I started looking around and I started to think, I've spent many years on this and we've got a good thing going, but all this money's flooding into the space. And now the competition's really heating up. And I started to feel like if I don't come up with some type of a partnership here, there's a chance that one of these guys with the hundreds of millions of dollars that they have is going to come and just pull the rug out from under us. And I had a great team at the time. And, we were all trying to work to make this successful. And I felt like it was a smart thing to do to consider partnering with somebody who could be more of a strategic, could put money in the business, but could also bring something else to the table. And so at the time I was, I met with the Gilt team. I met with, you might remember a retailer called Karmaloop.
Nope.
It's a big streetwear retailer out of Boston. I met with the founder and his wife and their team, great people up in Boston. I had a really fun weekend with them. And I remember at the end of that weekend, I went to meet with them right before I was leaving town. And they were like, look, we want to buy your business, but we're going to be frank. Like, if you don't sell it to us, we're going to launch a competitive business. So I could feel the heat coming from multiple parties. That pissed me off though, I will say. And I decided not to go with them. I was like, look, it felt like a threat in a way. And again, great people. And I've spent some time with them since. So nothing against them, but I felt like I had to do something. And so I was talking to Karmaloop, talking to Gilt, talking to Complex Magazine, Mark Echo, and that whole crew. And I was talking to another private equity-backed media company called Thrillist. And ultimately, I ended up doing the deal with the private equity firm that owned Thrillist because it was not only money off the table and money into the business, but they had built up a media property made up of guys in all the biggest cities across the country. They had a newsletter business.
I loved Thrillist.
There you go.
Yes.
So for us to plug into that audience seemed like not just, again, money coming in, but it seemed like a bit of a strategic advantage from an audience standpoint. And so that's the reason I did the deal. And funny enough, it did work out that way in some ways, but in another way that's kind of funny, I almost feel like it went in reverse and benefited the media business maybe more than the commerce business, because in commerce, you can acquire customers and there's a whole model behind it, right? I can acquire you for $20, and if your LTV is 100 and the margin on that 100 is 50, there's money to be made there.
Yeah.
In media, it's a little harder. You can't really go out and spend money to acquire customers because you're just monetizing them with eyeballs or advertising dollars. Sorry, you're monetizing the eyeballs with advertising dollars. So you can't, it's really hard to go out and spend money to acquire customers in media because it's not profitable. But what we did was we would acquire customers on the commerce side and then funnel them in to the media property.
Mm-hmm.
So in some ways it worked, but it worked in reverse.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a really interesting journey.
Had you not done any deal, what's your best guess of what would have happened?
I've put a lot of thought into it, maybe too much at times, because of course we'll never know what could have happened. But I will say, and I've seen this now play out a couple of times, we had a pretty special business with a lot of momentum, a unique brand in the space that we were in, great relationships. And while I think it was prudent to be aware of the risk of somebody coming in with a lot of money and taking the opportunity from us, I think it would have been really hard for somebody to do that with the level of authenticity that the customer and the suppliers in the industry would have embraced. So there's a part of me that thinks we would have figured it out. And I've seen there were other commerce brands or platforms that started around the time that we did that stayed independent, and they now have huge businesses. Mm-hmm. And so there's a part of me that thinks we would have made it. And just knowing the team we had and knowing that we were approaching it with humility. I wasn't, approaching this with ego at the time and trying to spend a ton of money and buying fast cars because we were doing well and fancy stuff. I was still living very modestly. All the money was going back in the business. So I'd like to think we would have stayed that way and we would have made it, but we'll never know. There's just as high a likelihood that had we not done that deal, the business could have cratered and crumbled, and I wouldn't be here today, probably. Was
there a fear that these other, kind of similar shops coming in would have went to the brands and said, we'll pay you, 20% more? Of course. Yeah. And so now your margins are...
There's all those fears. I think go to the brands and undercut us.
Yeah.
There's coming into the customer acquisition market, competing with us there and driving the CPAs up.
Yeah.
There was that. It was all the above.
The group that you went with, how did you feel like that relationship was? Certainly I can imagine in the very beginning, there's this pitch about how we're in this together. And I've heard a lot of horror stories. Yeah. But I'm curious to hear each individual, how did it play out for you?
Yeah. It's funny you mention it because it was very much that. It was going into it. It was like, we're all in this together. And we had a lot of whiteboard sessions around how it would go. And for the most part, it did go the way that, it was discussed and agreed upon. But I think as a young founder, having never gone through a deal like that, there were so many things that I didn't even know to ask for, or so many aspects of a partnership that I would enter into, aspects that I would want out of a partnership. And I didn't even know. And so I remember right after we closed the deal, one of the partners that I was kind of working with on this, I remember he called the next day and he's like, hey, I want to meet every day at 4:00. I need an update on everything that happened that day. And you can imagine going from running your own show and, running you had started this thing from 2006, bootstrapped it all the way up to this moment on your own, completely independent and free. And now somebody wants to meet with you every day at 4 to basically like check in on what the work you did that day. That was an eye opener for me of like, man, I don't know if this was the right move. And it was kind of a precursor for what kind of how the relationship went too. And look, these were not bad people. And, the individual that I partnered with is not a bad guy at all. I think we were just two young guys. Like we didn't know. And he had taken a risk on pushing for this deal with the private equity fund. So there's pressure from the fund down to him. And now there's pressure from him to me. And I just didn't give that enough, I guess, thought going into the deal. So when he was reaching out, wanting to meet every day, I had already signed the paperwork, right? And so now I'm in this. And luckily, the business started to do really well. So with success, I was able to get some autonomy back. But really what happened over the next few years was our business was growing like crazy. The media business was growing, but it was a little more of a challenging environment. And when you had this company that was crushing it, it was like everybody wanted their hands in it and wanted a piece of it. And so now
be part of the success
they
of it.
wanted to be a part of it. And now I'm in all these meetings with all these executives from the media side. And there's just so many cooks in the kitchen, right? And it became really challenging to run the business and to kind of be the leader for the team, because the team is in the meetings with me and you've got all these people coming and going, sharing their opinions. So I guess at the leadership level, it was a little muddy.
Oh, fuck. I can't imagine you having this relationship with your team and then you're actually having to play this other role where you can't really piss these people off because you want to tell these people to fuck off because they don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And so you're trying to be authentic in all this, but your team is actually seeing this like, you don't have our back like we think you could. You're like, you're stuck because you're trying to make everybody happy and you're making no one happy.
It was the weirdest spot to be. And I think now in hindsight, and as we were talking earlier, like I've read so much about Warren Buffett and Munger, and they talk a lot about the businesses that they invest in. They put good leadership in place if it's not already there, and they leave them be. Because if you're meddling in the business all the time, it creates problems with the team. The team doesn't know who the true leader is. It creates problems with your CEO. If you're telling them what to do and they don't want to do it, but you're forcing them to do it and they don't have success, they blame you. So as I've learned more about that, I realized it was kind of what was going on, but I just didn't know. I was like a young founder dealing with this for the first time. So some very challenging years for me. 2 of those years, I was in Columbus, Ohio. We built an office up in New York City, and we built this really nice like video conferencing center. So like we had a really nice setup in Columbus and we had one in New York. So I was in all the meetings, but kind of like today, I was on Zoom. Everybody does that today, but back then it wasn't as common. And so I did that for 2 years, but it just kept getting worse with people kind of really meddling in our business. And so I decided 2 years in to move to New York because I thought if I'm in the room, I can maybe take the reins back a little bit and kind of get the trust from our PE fund and whoever just felt like they couldn't trust us. And so I moved to New York. And when I got up this is 2013.
2013. You're married at this point.
No, but I was with the woman that I ended up marrying. So I moved to New York, and within a few months, I knew, I'm like, man, the ship has just sailed. Like there's no getting this thing back. And I remember we'd be in strategy meetings, and let's say it was like a tech strategy session. And part of my role is like to come in and lay out the vision for how we want our technology to evolve. Where do we want our mobile apps to go? What new features am I seeing out there that we want to integrate? And then working on a roadmap with our technology team. So we would go through that whole process, and then like a few weeks would go by and I'd get an email. Hey, it would be my business partner on the media side who was, the one that kind of took the bet on the business. Said, hey, can you come meet with, our CFO and I? We just want to talk to you about the tech strategy that you put together. And so I'd go meet with them, and they'd be like, hey, we love where this is going, but we want you to know we actually need the tech resources for this big project we're doing on the media side. And that project is going to touch on the commerce side a little bit. So unfortunately, you're going to have to wait like 3 or 4 months.
Oh my God.
Before this happens. So that would happen over and over and over again, to the point of, for me as the face and the leader of this business, feeling like completely ineffective as a leader. I just kind of...
They just cut your balls off.
Yeah, basically. And I just decided like, it's probably time for me to move on. You know, it's like, I have a job now. I have a job where I'm kind of just like a face, but I'm not really able to really impact things. The tech team, the finance team, all these cloud-based teams that were supporting both businesses really weren't reporting to me.
Yep.
So that ownership just wasn't there anymore.
Do you have any bit of the company at this point?
Yeah. I still owned the same chunk.
You still own a third of it?
Yep. Yeah. And we had done a deal where my third transitioned into, it's kind of a hard thing to explain, but I owned a third of the commerce business, but we actually merged both businesses together.
Yep.
So now I own a big chunk of the whole thing.
Okay.
Which was great because now I'm aligned with my partners.
Okay.
So that actually worked out pretty well for me. But yeah, it was a minority share. I didn't have like control. I couldn't go and sell the shares anytime I wanted. You know, it was illiquid.
What would you say to someone, a new founder who was in your shoes, who didn't even know what he didn't know, which I think has got to be so common.
So common.
How does someone, you know, is it having a great attorney, and like, what are the resources you need to go in so you don't get absolutely run over in a deal that looks great on paper, but there's so many things that you're just not even considering? Like, what do you say to someone?
I would say you would want to find people you can trust and mentors, people that have been through it before. Attorneys, yeah, you could be an attorney. I had an attorney who was advising me on some of this stuff, and he did point out some of the pitfalls that could happen. And maybe, like a lot of things, you have to learn the lesson on your own, unfortunately. So I did that. But I think if I were first-time founder, like if I were me back in 2010 when this was all going down, I would just try to talk to as many people as I could that I could trust that had been through something like this. And I don't know really what else you could do. I think that would be the main thing. And then just try to make the best decision for yourself.
So you had this attorney that was advising you. Did you have anybody else that you felt was at that level of like I did.
Actually, this is a cool story, and he's an executive.
I love cool stories.
Let's go. He's a pretty well-known executive coach now. And at the time he was just starting in that field, but he was a former very successful venture capitalist that had basically a mental breakdown and got out of the business and became a coach because he realized it's a lot of stuff we've talked about where it's like you're grinding and chasing and you're building wealth and like you're sacrificing all this for it. And then you realize like what really matters in life. He had a moment like that and he left and became a coach. And I just out of, I guess, a fortunate circumstance, had a friend that moved to New York and was working with him. And my friend told him, hey, I've got this buddy that's got this high-flying business and he's going through this, transaction right now. And the guy goes, give him my number, tell him to call me and I'll help him as much as I can. I don't want to see him get screwed.
Yeah.
And for free, like he didn't charge me or anything. This guy was willing to jump on calls with me. And yeah, Jerry. And I worked with him too for a year or two after that as my coach. And, I haven't talked with him in a while. My friend still works with him, but yeah, I always look back on that and I just think how appreciative I am of him doing that. And it's just like, who does that? I don't know. It was just such a sweet gesture by a total stranger.
Yeah.
So very fortuitous for that to happen.
What's interesting, I think about that almost in contrast to, and again, I think you're sitting across the table with the group that you partner with, the private equity, and you see these humans, right? Yeah. And seem like a very trusting person, and I feel like I am the same way, and I could believe a lot of the things that are being said and not really understanding what's underneath all the, the kind of the contract and the legalese. But we've talked about this since you've been here in Austin. Like, what are the incentives? And they're humans, yes, but they're in this container of a private equity group, and their incentives are different than yours.
That's right.
And I've heard you say it a couple of times here, like they're good guys.
Yeah.
And like, how do we separate? Like, how do we it's not personal, it's business, and just protecting oneself, their good nature from their own good nature is so hard.
It is.
Because for me, it's like a blind spot.
Yeah. I spent many years after leaving. I shared this with you. I think I was angry. I was mad I did the deal. I was mad at how the way it went down. Even when I left, I left New York. So I moved to New York, as I shared, because I wanted to take the reins again. And I felt like the business was it was moving in a direction that was out of my control. And I wanted to come back up and just kind of like get back to running my business. When I got up there, I realized that ship had sailed. At the end of that year, I decided I'm going to move back to Ohio because I pretty much have a job. I can do it from there. But once I shared that message with the team, they were like, all right, well, we think leadership needs to be here now, and we want to hire a new CEO. And so I was all for it. Mm-hmm. And I was like, look, I'll stay on until we find somebody new. Happy to be a part of the process. Unfortunately, wasn't allowed to be a part of the process. So I didn't get to interview any of the CEOs. I don't know why, but they didn't want me in any of the interviews. And then when I left, they did find somebody. I was handed a press release that basically was like, here's the message we're going to put out there, which is pretty common. Just put the press release out there, and then I left. And I think I had 2 weeks of severance or something like that after all this. And now I'm in Columbus, Ohio, after having built and run this high-flying business. I had like 2 weeks of severance. I mean, look, I'd sold it, so I had cash in the bank. But just that feeling of like, wow, I wasn't a part of hiring the new CEO. I didn't even get to meet the person until like a year later. I got like 2 weeks of severance, maybe a little. I mean, it was under a month, it was like nothing. And I also was basically cut off from all communications of like financial communications around how the business was doing. Cut off from, I'd reach out quarterly just to check in, and I would basically be like, hey, can we like just have a quick phone call? Don't have time.
Because you still have a chunk of the biz.
Yeah. And also it was my baby in a way,
Yeah, in a very big way.
So I'd reach out to like set up a phone call, and all I would hear was, it's going amazing. We don't have time to talk. It's going amazing.
Oh, God.
So because of a lot of that, I was just upset, and I was just a little angry, and I had a tough year or so, given all that was going on, but also my identity was pretty tied up in the business too, which I didn't know was a thing.
Oh,
and
wow.
Now I'm out of the business. People are asking me what I do and what I'm doing next. And I'm like, I don't even know who I am right now, because I'm basically the business. It was like we were one and the same. And it was a challenging time for sure. So I just got off on a little tangent. I can't remember exactly the question.
You're all over it.
Yeah, that was a few years.
So what's this, 15, 16?
Yeah, that was 15, 16. Yeah.
When did you get married?
16. Yep.
The good news is you had a chance to buy the business back and make it right. Isn't that what happened?
Yes, the story we all. Oh my gosh. Yeah, the story we all want to tell for sure. But
yeah, so what did that look like? So COVID hits, e-com is gangbusters. We're all shopping online. We're doing all this. People are at home. They're buying shit.
Yeah.
What happens to the business that it got?
Yeah, I was just going to say, we've got to go back even a little further, a couple of years prior.
Let's go back. We got time.
So the 2 years that I was just sharing about when I was for lack of a better term, cut off.
Yeah.
Well, I get a call one day, 2 years later, and it was my old partners, and they say, "Hey, do you want to buy the business back?" And I'm thinking to myself, I mean, this was like $100 million business, when I left.
See what I got in the fucking ashtray here.
Exactly. My pennies falling out of my pockets here.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll try.
Get another SBA loan.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm thinking, I'm like, what? Buy the business back? There's no way I could do that. They were going bankrupt. So in some ways, the previous 2 years when I would reach out and I'm like, how are things going? It's going amazing. We don't have time to talk. In some ways, when I heard it was going bankrupt, I was a little like, it's a weird thing to say. You're almost like happy in a way. Like, okay, they couldn't figure it out.
I just got traded from the fucking Yankees. I hope you guys fucking lose.
Yeah, exactly. Which is ego firing. I'm not saying that's right, but hey, it's us. So
I get that.
There was a little bit of that, and then a little bit of sadness because I'm like, what? Like we had such a great thing going.
How did you fuck this up?
And why didn't you call me sooner? Like, I mean, geez, I built the damn thing. Maybe I could have at least helped or been another like voice or mind around the table to help think through the strategies that you were putting in place. I mean, I'd like to think I would have earned that. But anyhow, they called when it was bankrupt. And so the business, basically the assets got liquidated. I was a part of that process and trying to buy it back at that time. Ultimately, it was a 6-month period working with a professional wind down firm.
Okay.
Again, I had never done anything like that. And I just got frustrated, man. These are like professional sharks. And they're just jerking you left and right.
Yeah, what's that look like, a wind down? How does that work?
So basically...
So you have debts and you have assets.
Yes.
Liabilities and assets.
Yep.
And when you go through bankruptcy...
Yeah. So typically the controlling shareholders of a business that's going through bankruptcy will bring in a firm, and it's called... I'm going to do my best. I'm not a lawyer, right?
Yeah,
but it's called assignment for the benefit of creditors. So they're assigning responsibility to this firm to get as much money out of the assets for the benefit of the creditors.
Okay.
So the assets we've got our customer list and our social media accounts and all of our inventory. So they're running a 6-month process where they are basically just trying to get as much money as they can for the product while courting potential buyers of the brand name and the IP, me being one of them.
Mm-hmm.
So along that 6-month journey, there are all these conversations around, we'll close in a month. Don't worry. Like, we like you the best. You were the founder and we like the proposal you're putting in place. We'll close in a month. But behind closed doors, they're meeting with everybody else. They're saying the same thing to all of them. A month comes and then it pushes to 2 and 3 because they're getting money for the inventory. So they're really good at this. And I had no prior experience with it. And I just kind of fatigued at the end of it.
Yep.
And decided, I just got frustrated. I don't even think I put in a final bid, honestly, at the end of it.
Yeah.
So someone else did put a bid in. They bought it. They ran it for a few years and ultimately just decided that e-com was too hard. And they didn't have an e-com background.
Okay.
And
any idea what they paid for it?
I mean, not much. I don't know.
Yeah.
Really low, compared to what it was worth. Geez.
Yeah.
But I couldn't even speculate.
Mm-hmm.
And so they bought it, ran it for 2 years. And then, the assets were just sitting there. And then COVID happened, and COVID was a huge boon for e-commerce. The e-com market exploded, and it was like boom times, right? Like you could do no wrong. Customer acquisition costs were in a great place. Conversion rates were at an all-time high. Everybody was at home just shopping online. And I was, wanting to get back in the game for sure. And I had built another business since, and that business had stabilized, and we had hired a great a leader who we're still working with today. And I was looking to deploy capital and to do it again. And it just so happened that, COVID and that seeing the e-com boom just so happened to coincide with when my other business was starting to have some stability, and I was able to pull away from it a little bit and give the reins to our new CEO. And then my old business came back into the equation essentially. And I had a chance to buy it back, and I did.
And did they go directly to you, the buyers, or how did that?
I had stayed in touch with them.
Yeah.
And
Did they ever ask for advice along the way or anything like that? Or was it just, you just...
Yeah, I just stayed in touch with them, offered advice, just wanted to kind of keep tabs and see. Again, a lot of great people worked on this thing and we spent so much time on it. I just wanted to see it be successful. So I'd stayed in touch with them to see how it was going. And then when they basically stopped updating the site, I noticed it pretty quickly. And then every 6 months I might reach out and ultimately was able to reacquire the assets. And we relaunched, it was about 2 years ago.
Okay. Same brand and everything.
Yeah. We relaunched with the same model from the early days. And it was a challenge, man. I mean,
what were the things that were unforeseen that were the challenges? It had been a handful of years since you've been in e-com.
Yeah. So it had been a handful of years since I was in that seat. The industry has changed a ton. I mean, this market moves at lightning speed. So you think you're an expert. I mean, you could leave for 6 months and not be an expert anymore. And I didn't really realize that. So that was one thing. I also think I was letting emotion and a little bit of ego cloud decision-making, right? Like you think about being a good capital allocator, you've got to really separate that stuff from your decision-making. You're typically betting on good people. You're betting on a good business that's got proven profitability, that has a moat around it. You're being patient if those opportunities aren't presenting themselves. Like this was the opposite of all that, right? Like it was a lot of ego and emotion. I wanted my business back. I didn't fully think through that it was going to be like running a startup, and I didn't want to run a startup. I really wanted to buy it back, hire somebody to run it, and then exist in the same way I'm existing in my other business, which is more advising. And it was not that. I mean, it was a grind. And so I bought it back in June of 22. We relaunched in September, and we relaunched with the same model from the early days, that flash sale model, because the way the economy had shifted, it was really interesting. It had kind of cycled all the way back to the same way that it was when I launched. So brands were sitting on a lot of inventory. Interest rates had gone up. Consumers were tightening up. So they were valuing deals a lot more.
Oh, yeah.
So it looked exactly the way it looked in 08.
Fuck yeah.
Which I was like, green light, right? Like, let's go. And in some ways it did play out that way. But what changed was e-commerce has gotten way more sophisticated. I was working 8 a.m. till midnight every day. In order to have a team supporting me more, it was money out of my pocket to pay all them. So I wanted to get the business to a certain level before we started like building out a team, right?
Yeah.
And fulfillment centers have gotten so much smarter in the last 10 years. They're now charging for everything. So that line item on your P&L is like 2x. Customer acquisition costs have gotten twice as expensive. But then also with the privacy changes. So like Apple made a lot of these privacy adjustments where you're not able to track consumers as easily. And why that played a big factor in what we were doing is we were revitalizing this customer list. So we had like a 15 million email list of all these guys that we were trying to sort of like re-warm up. Because of privacy changes, when you email people, you don't know if they actually opened it or don't open it. And you pay per email that you're sending.
Oh.
So you can imagine we're sending out all these emails and trying to see signals of who's engaged and who isn't so that we can cut the unengaged because it's costing us money.
Oh gosh.
And we weren't able to see that anymore. And I completely I just underestimated how costly that was going to be. So I missed that in a big way. So it was a business that was like 2 to 3x more costly than I thought. And then on top of it, we got to a certain level of revenue, but it just kind of plateaued. And for us to go and continue to acquire customers to get it to the level where it was profitable, we tried everything. I really did. We tried everything. And I kind of described it to you earlier. I felt like I was like beating my head against the wall every week. It was like, we're trying something. We're all excited. Fails. All right, next thing. Try it. Everybody's excited. Fails. And it just was like that for an entire year. So yeah, so that was the first year. And then the second year, we simplified the business model. We got our gross margins way up. I was able to not work as much. So I was able to like have a more better lifestyle. But I had started to go through a whole journey around like, why did I do this? Like, why did I really get involved in this? And that's when these thoughts around like ego and emotion kind of clouding my judgment started popping up. And I started to think about that with the reality of the work that it was going to take to make this thing successful and profitable. And I started looking at it through just like first principles thinking. And it's like in a retail business, right? When it's not working, go all the way down to the core. Who's the customer? What are their needs? You got to know that. And then you have to craft an assortment to match their needs and a marketing strategy that communicates that and kind of meets them where they are. And when I started really thinking through that, I had to ask myself, do I have the energy and the fortitude that I had when I started this, right? I was a young kid and I was super fired up and passionate. Like, do I have that right now? And I couldn't look in the mirror and say yes. Just for whatever reason.
Yeah.
I just kind of realized that this business just didn't excite me in the same way that it did in the past. And I had been working, grinding from, like I said, 8 a.m. till midnight for about a year. So it wasn't like I was scared of the work, but I just kind of, it just kind of fizzled out for me. And somebody said this to me. They said, it was a quote along the lines of like, recognizing when your ship has become your anchor. And that hit me pretty hard. And I was like, I really think that's what's going on here. And so I had to make the decision to, walk away.
And when did you make that decision and how long does it take to wind that down?
So I made it a few months ago and the wind down was pretty quick. I mean, with all the connections we had, we sold the inventory in like a day. And then we kept our customer service team. So my other business is a contact center.
Yeah.
So it's easy for us we kept the service team in place and made sure we took care of all the customers. And then, really that was that. Because I self-funded it all. So I didn't have any investors or anybody to, I had to go answer to or any of that. So
how did it feel when you were finally able to turn that off?
Felt relieved.
Yeah.
And it felt nice to close a chapter that was, again, that was like the ride of my life, right? And it has created so much abundance and relationships. I wouldn't be here if that didn't happen. So I felt relieved and, you're a little sad because I was so excited to try to get that brand back to where it could just be a sustainable business.
Yeah.
Because so many great people worked on that. I mean, we had an awesome team. We spent so much of our time together. It was beloved. We loved what we were doing. And I wanted to give it a chance to like keep going because I know that whole team, they'd be proud of that. But the markets change, and it was a good lesson for me just as an aspiring capital allocator, which is kind of what I'll do going forward. Yeah. And hopefully it leads me to some exciting opportunities in the future.
How would you say that the last couple of years has impacted your personal life? Like what lessons have you learned through that journey of this thing that's a work thing, but also very personal?
Yeah.
And I think we're similar in the way that I think a lot of our male friends are, that we can work 8 to midnight for months on end, just razor focused, go with that kind of that goal in mind that we'll get there. We'll get it figured out. And I know for me, I can put the blinders on and there can be a lot of collateral damage that I don't see until I take the blinders off. It's like, oh, fuck.
Yeah.
What have you done?
Yeah, it's very similar for me. I think a year into that journey is when I really that was the peak of my pain.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I was pretty burnt out. It was clear it wasn't working. I was spending a lot of money to pursue this. And I started having all those thoughts about what what led me into this situation? Like, was it ego? Was it emotion? Was it, seeking external validation? Like, just what was it? And I started going down just rabbit holes around driven personalities and, not being somebody who can just sort of sit still and kind of embrace patience and quiet and listening to your thoughts and those sort of things. So I think that's some of the growth started as a result of this. Some of that growth started as a result of this. And then I also started to think back on how it impacted my marriage even. Because I think like lack of patience and ego probably was a contributing factor into getting me back into this business. And then realizing that maybe that wasn't the right way to approach a business opportunity. And then saying, well, where did this also maybe lead me astray? Yeah, and it took me into my marriage a little bit. And I was thinking about that. I'm like, it probably is something I should look into a little further, because when I go back to it, I think I had the right intentions there, but I definitely don't think some of those things helped contribute to a successful marriage. And look, it wasn't successful because of both sides. I'm, not going to point all the blame on myself, but it's not fair, I don't think, to share the other side of it.
Mm-hmm.
But I know for me, in just taking accountability, I think, just ego was a part of it, right? Ego was a part of it. Lacking patience, all those things were a big part of it. So I think midway through the 2-year journey, again, the 2-year journey just ended, but midway through, I started having a lot of these thoughts. And then in the last year, I've started to do a lot of work, just unraveling it a little bit more. And that's kind of some of the plant medicine has emerged. And it just so happened that I met a friend that kind of was like a nice sort of bridge into that realm a little bit. And it's helped me kind of see myself devoid of ego a little bit. And look, I don't know where it goes, but I'll just say I'm so much more aware of some of those negative behaviors and where they led me. And again, while I have so much abundance, like, you want to take accountability, you want to learn from the mistakes so that in the future you don't make them again. And that's kind of, that's where I'm at in the journey, I would say.
Yeah, it's these things. I mean, obviously a very challenging period in your life.
Yeah.
And had you not gone on that journey over the last couple of years, what level of where would you be operating on the level of unconscious to, this awoken something in you, and through a series of relationships and opportunities, you found something like plant medicine, which is another entryway into our curiosity about why we're here and what's important and who am I without all these things. And to your point of like, it's been my experience that I experience myself almost objectively without the guilt, the shame, the ego. And that's really important. And it's just like a little piece of the puzzle. And it's like the follow-up is that integration piece, which I haven't always threaded the needle on that one. It's
probably the most challenging part.
It really is. Yeah. The easy part, honestly, is well, easy, but right set and setting is obviously crucial. But taking the medicine is no matter how much fear you have going in, like that's kind of the easy part. And going on the journey, it can be really challenging, but that ends. And then it's like, okay, now you've been shown this information. What are you about to do with it?
Yeah.
And I was sharing with you, I had a very powerful, we'll just call it a medicine journey in the spring, and profound as any that I've had, and felt a kind of a beautiful tale coming from that for a couple of months. And then some of the old ways came back in over the summer. And it was almost like that experience. It almost felt like it didn't happen, or it was very much on hold.
Yeah.
And what I've come to find out is, as I've come back on I'll just call it an ascent from where I felt like I was in the summertime, and over the last couple of months, it's really gotten a lot of clarity and taking care of myself, almost like that self-advocacy. I think that's such a red flag for me, is when I'm not taking care of myself, whether it's how I'm eating, if I'm training. And it doesn't mean I have to be hardcore training. It doesn't mean I have to be eating super clean, but those things, and then dependency on multiple substances, like those are all indicators that I'm in a bit of an unconscious state, that there's stuff that I'm being asked to feel that I'm not wanting to feel. And I'm not advocating for myself. I'm not showing up for myself. I'm not making the sacrifices. And I don't mean to say you have to be sacrificing, the fun parts of life, but really, I just felt like in these moments when I've shown up for myself, things have worked really well. And I feel like in this period throughout some of the summertime, it was very much the opposite of that, where fucking night sweats, and I would have some kind of aching pain when I would sleep, and all the while knowing like I'm not taking care of myself, and yet not willing to do anything about it. So I'm carrying that guilt and shame of like, dude, you fucking know better. And it's like I almost didn't have the strength in that moment, or maybe I just had the awareness that I'm good right now. I'm safe.
Yeah.
And when I come back to Austin and we get back in a regular cycle, I will address these things. And that's what happened. And I just feel like I'm able to reflect back on that period rather than have the guilt and the shame that I felt when I was experiencing it. It's more like, oh, I needed to go through that to remind myself that it's always there if I'm not paying attention.
Yeah.
And can I turn that around a little bit sooner?
Yeah.
And what were those things I wasn't wanting to feel and experience, and that I was trying to, numb and check out from. And, I've had a lot of kind of contemplation around that lately. And I can get lost in the healthy things too.
Yeah.
And being very regimented around that. And so I've been trying to be very careful with that and be more attuned and intuitive with, kind of the flow of my life right now, and not trying to pile on a bunch of stuff to do, which is another trigger for me, that I'm trying to show my worth by what I'm getting done every day.
Yep. Which is, I think, a common thing for driven guys.
Yeah.
I go through the same type of stuff. Like I have, over the last few years, I have a hard time. I can't sit and watch a movie. Like I won't let myself relax. I got to go do something. I should be working out. I should go put a few miles in. I should be researching some new business idea. But it's like that pressure that I'm always like putting on myself to accomplish more, versus being able to embrace, and whether it's watching a movie or just embracing stillness and seeing where some of those patterns could be maybe a negative in your life. And it's so hard for me. There's that quote. It's like a French mathematician, I think, from way back in the day. All the world's problems are the result of man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone.
Oh, yeah.
When I heard that, I want to say it was in a Warren Buffett book, maybe, or a Charlie Munger book.
Uh-huh.
I remember listening to that and I was like, oh my God, like they're talking about me, It's like, I can't do that. I can now, but I couldn't do that, I should say.
I think it's that balance that, we've talked about this since you've been here, but like, I kind of look at it as having one foot in contentment.
Yeah.
And that there's a stillness in contentment.
Yeah.
And then also being creative and, maybe the achievement or whatever, that it's not like it has to be one or the other, and to kind of thread that needle and really dance that dance is what I feel like I'm being called towards.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, I'm sitting a little bit more in the contentment piece, and I think I've needed that. Within that, it's a reminder. We talked about this on the car ride, is this idea of safety and not having that sense of safety for, in the early part of my life, and having that be imprinted that for me to create safety or to feel safe, but not necessarily be safe, was to achieve at sports, achieve academically, and then achieve in business and make a bunch of money and all the stuff that comes with that. Contentment isn't about any of that. And so when I'm still not going forward and charging towards some goal, and I'm just in that stillness of contentment, it's like getting those reps in that I'm safe right here and it's okay.
Yeah.
So it's almost like leaning into that a little bit more. And I felt really good about that. I think partially because health-wise, I've been really, I feel like in a good place with not too much structure and rigidity with it. But, and it's funny, I had dinner with a friend the other night, and he's like, your problem isn't the structure or the discipline. It comes with the intensity of it. It's like, bro, like, you don't know me that well, but boy, you know me really well.
Yeah.
You know? And for me to like not be in that intensity of my health, so again, training 5-6 days a week, but not killing myself, going to, this bio wellness club here called Matter that I go to 3-4 days a week, and I go get different treatments that do different things depending on what I'm feeling I need that day. And just watching, have you seen those in-body they measure your kind of biometrics and stuff. No. It's an in-body machine. Just seeing over the course of 6 weeks, 7 weeks, like how my numbers, which, I mean, I don't want to sound like a dick, but they were already really fucking good.
Sure.
And they've just continued to get better. Like I've measured them 3 different times. And like the second I was like, wow, that improved on. And there's like, and they got a little better when I checked a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's because I'm taking the working out and the working in, and I'm putting them together. And I'm not killing myself in the cold plunge every day. And I'm trying to, tune into what my body needs. And it's been really interesting. And I'm playing a lot of golf, and it's fucking fun for me.
Golf's fun.
We played golf. We went to the Comedy Mothership last night and saw Ron and Tony, and
had a freaking blast.
We had a blast. Yeah. It's just like doing those things.
Yeah, I agree. It fills your soul.
There's an ease, and it's like our life can be easy in moments. And I think it runs very counter to what we're conditioned.
I totally agree.
We talked about, why do I do the podcast? Because we're conditioned with so many of these ideas. A lot of them are people, we don't even know where they come from, and they seem like good principles. But when we look at how we interpret them, it's work on your weaknesses. And it's like, no, play to your fucking strengths. And, like working on the weaknesses, it almost like brings into focus, like I'm not good. So there's you're ruminating on something you're not good in. I'm not saying you don't ever work on them, but when that's the complete focus, you're denying yourself the ability to just play to your strengths. What comes easy to you? Well, find out what that is and just do that shit.
Yeah.
And your life will be, I found much more enjoyable to be able to sit in that space. Now, not always easy to be there, right? But I think having some sort of orientation towards that as an idea, as a direction, as an aim, I think is the right for me, it's the right path. And when I feel like I'm out of sync, and again, I'm on this substance or that, and I'm reaching for something, I'm trying to feel something I don't want to feel. And I'm out of alignment. I'm out of attunement with what I'm meant to be doing.
Yeah, it's interesting. Again, for driven guys, I think, like when you're younger, you think you want the money and the cars and the success and the validation of the success with like articles being written about you and all this stuff. And then you have it and you realize, man, that's not it. I mean, there's so many instances of people kind of getting there and realizing that. And we were talking about this earlier, I feel like I don't want to not go after that stuff and strive and be successful. I still want to do that. But I just want to make sure going forward that I'm not doing it for those reasons, I guess. And I want to be able to be more patient with myself along the way. Because as you were just describing, so how you go down the rabbit hole on some of these health things, like, I mean, I do some of this in business, right? Where if I'm working 8 to 12, my personal life suffers, my relationships suffer, like all these super important things suffer. And I'm like, for what? For what? There's no point, because like the important things in life are the things that I'm missing out on. So I'm trying to balance that drive and that wanting to be successful again. I wouldn't be here if that didn't happen.
Correct.
With the contentment. It's a tough thing to do for just driven man. I think it's going to be a lifelong journey, but I think like some of the plant medicine stuff has shined a light, I think, on some of the negative patterns for me. And like, if I go back to kind of tie some of these themes together, like I left my business, my identity was tied up into it. I was angry. That was my ego firing, right? I'm like, now I'm not the guy anymore, right? People are asking me what I do. I don't know. I don't have the big business anymore. I'm cut off from the business. That then kind of seeped into my marriage a little bit, right? Because when you're an entrepreneur, man, everybody's looking up to you. Like you walk into a meeting and you say something, that's what the team's going to do.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
That's just how it is. Like you're the owner of the business. You're the founder. You're in the press and you say something, people see that. They're always looking up to you. So in some ways you're on a pedestal. And then you go home and you're in your marriage and you're not getting what you want and you're not being treated that way. And a friend of mine who is another entrepreneur that went through his own journey kind of shone the light on this for me. And when he was saying it, I was like, oh my gosh, yeah. Like I was definitely walking around the house this way and maybe showing up in my relationship in this way. And I was thinking I was doing the right thing or doing better, but it was probably destructive in some ways, and then thinking about getting into my business again. And you want to be the man again, your ego's firing a bit. They failed. They drove it into the ground. I'll be the one to bring it back. And you're blinded to, is this a good business opportunity or not? So it's like recognizing some of those patterns, I think, has been super helpful for me. I don't know where this all goes, but I know I'm now really aware of it. And I've had this, I don't know if it's like a mantra, but like this thought that I've just been thinking about each week. And I'll try to do it justice. So I read The Man's Search for Meaning. Have you ever read that book, Viktor Frankl?
Yeah.
Unbelievable book. So my favorite quote is that love is the ultimate and the highest goal to which man can aspire. So kind of the first thing I think a lot about is like pursue love. So that could be love of self, that's what I have now. I don't have a relationship, but love of self, love of others. And, hopefully I'll find that again in somebody someday and have an amazing relationship with all this perspective that I've generated the last few years. So pursue love, be wary of ego. And the ego can be beneficial. It's probably the thing that powered me to success in some ways, but it's also been destructive in many ways. Live with doubt. So famous Charlie Munger speech, I think it was at Harvard, The Psychology of Human Misjudgment. So we as humans are pre-programmed to avoid doubt. Doubt is uncomfortable, right? You think about like, he talks about it as it relates to religion, like, is God real? Is God not real? For a lot of people, that's an uncomfortable spot to sit in. So they'll jump to a side and then just get entrenched in their beliefs.
Oh yeah.
And Charlie talked about, even up to the day he died, that his goal was to live with doubt. And I've shared this with some people and they say, no, you mean live without doubt. I'm like, no, I want to live with doubt, because how I interpret that is I want to be open-minded in life. I want to be open-minded. I want to be able to hear your opinions and perspectives on things that maybe I don't believe in. But I want to, if you've got good info, I want to be able to ingest it. I don't want to be so close-minded. In this society that we're living in today, it just feels like there's more of that, like people entrenched on two sides, whether it's politics or COVID or vaccines, whatever the hell it is.
Yeah.
I just want to be open-minded. And then I want to embrace patience and stillness. So it's those four things. And so again, from all these experiences, like I don't really know where it all goes, but I feel like kind of using that as somewhat of a compass. That's where I'm at right now. And I think it could be helpful for anybody, actually.
I love that. Yeah. I love that. In particular, this live with doubt, and it invites curiosity, right? We talked about like being black and white, and it's something that you're in school and you're supposed to know the answer. There's an answer, you need to know the answer. And we're kind of just indoctrinated into that system. And I think when we can take a yes, no answer and just turn it into a maybe, my wife is feeling upset because of this. Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the most prominent thing, but there's maybe other things that are the reason she's being emotional in this way. My son did this because of this. Maybe it's like, just like, it's the brain wants to go to, like you said, we don't want doubt. We want an answer. And that way we can move on from that thing. It's not this dangling thing that we don't have a place for. Now we've got to hold all these things up. It's just this idea of, we don't know nearly as much as we think we do.
Right.
And to live with that doubt, live with that, which again invites that curiosity. That's, I feel like, when my life really changed, 7 years ago, when I realized that I didn't know shit. What I did know was the things that I had my own life experience with. And even that has changed, because that was years ago that I had that experience. And so if I can just come at things with a beginner's mind.
Yeah, that's a good one. Beginner's mindset.
Right? I don't necessarily do a great job with it from time to time, but I think just a reminder, like, oh yeah, like life's a lot easier too when you don't have to know the answer.
That's right.
You don't have to support some side that you're about 80% on.
I think I admire that in people too. I admire people when they admit they don't have the answer. I more look down on people that they're like know-it-alls, right?
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I think that is like such a refreshing take in today's world, when everybody feels like they have to have an opinion and they have all this info on why their opinion's right. Like I love when I sit with somebody and they're like, man, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, there's authenticity there. When someone else does have all the answers and everything's black and white and it's just very clear, and it's like, you're full of shit.
Yeah, I also think it's a little ego and emotion, right? Getting involved in their own morality, right? That's another quote that I love, and I think it's Charlie Munger too, is reason is the source of morality. And basically how I interpret that is like, you can either get to your morality through like ego and emotion, or you can use, logic and rational thought in your reasoning. And that, to me, like if you use logic and rational thought, like you ultimately get to the right place.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, when I see people who are just so locked in on their beliefs and won't see the outside of it, I always think back on that. Yeah, think back on that quote. I think it's like, man, there's some ego or something, some emotion being stirred up from somewhere. And it's okay. I guess like after plant medicine too, I have patience for those people.
Yeah.
I notice that a lot more too, like having patience for them, but just kind of hoping that, they could be a little more open-minded.
Yeah, they don't know. And there are plenty of things for you and I where we're hitting those blind spots too. And it's like,
Yeah.
we don't know. And I know it's been easy for me to forget that and feel like that guy's a fucking asshole, but really, just remembering my own journey and even the stuff that I struggle with today. It's like, you have this idea that you'd be through it now. Okay, I kind of figured it out. And it's like, no, like you said earlier, this is an ongoing journey. And there are times when we, split the uprights and we've got it going. And there are times when we fumble, and that's okay too.
Yep.
As long as we can take something away from that. One thing you said in the sauna, I'd love to just maybe close with this, is this concept of, we're talking about ultras, and we were talking about your dad running the one, it was 135 miles.
Yeah, Badwater 135. Yep.
Okay. And with it, I'd actually love to just hear a little bit about that experience.
Yep.
But the kind of follow up is this concept of running a race, whether it's a marathon, half marathon, the Badwater,
Yep.
Badwater 135, and then going to a yard before the finish line and not crossing.
Yep.
And when you had said that to me, that concept, it hit me hard because there's so many things, whether it's reading a book or whatever, that I want to get to the end. I want to complete it. There becomes I'm losing touch with the journey, and I'm so focused on that finish line that when I cross the finish line, I'm like, oh, I did it, but I was like unconscious the whole time or most of the time. And it's like, so when you kind of suggested that, it's like, wow, would I be okay putting all the work in and not actually completing the whatever the goal that I set out for myself, this kind of arbitrary goal almost. Like,
and I know we talked about this too. I don't think crossing the line is bad or stopping short of it, but it just kind of gets you thinking about, why are you doing what you're doing? And, are you having fun along the journey, or are you just doing it for the accolades, right? And crossing the line and like, I did it, I'm the guy. Yeah, I don't really think it's bad either way. But when somebody said that to me, it just kind of hit me. It got me thinking. I don't necessarily have my answer. The answer probably is to be content with either. But yeah, I guess back to the race. If I could share some of that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a cool journey. I mean, I started the ultra. I've run my whole life, but I started the ultra running in 2021. I was turning 40. And it just so happened that the race that probably means the most to my family, because we went there all growing up, my dad's run it like 29 times now, 30, it'll be 30 in June, is this race in Ohio. And it happened to be on my 40th birthday, like the exact day. And COVID had just happened. My dog had just passed. My marriage was over. And just to kind of keep mental toughness going and keep that grit, I decided I'm going to go for this. It's also, though, a good way to spend time with my family. My dad, that's his thing. He runs, and this was a way we can just bond a little more during a tougher time for me. So I embark on this journey, and I, get into that sport. Badwater 135 is like, they call it the toughest foot race on earth. I think to me, that's what it is. I mean, you could argue that, right? There's a lot of tough races. I don't want to, act like it's better than one or the other, but it's up there. And it's a race through Death Valley, California in July. You go over a few mountain ranges, it's 120 degrees. It's a pretty intense undertaking. We had talked about it for years. And my dad would always say, I think it's passed me by. I'm older now. He's 65 at the time. when he ran it. But so yeah, the years leading up to 65, when we would talk about it, he'd say it passed me by. So as I got into ultra running and I had enough qualifications to apply, I had this idea. I'm like, why don't we do it together? We'll apply, try to be the first father and son to run it. And so we do that. And I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, God, it's going to be rare that I get in. Maybe they see the story and the value in the story, but I just don't have the resume yet. He didn't think he would get in. I was like, there's no chance he doesn't get in. So they announced the people that are accepted. They pick 100 people globally. They announced that crew a couple months before the race, and he was the first one picked. And they were like, we've never seen a resume like this. Like, we couldn't believe it. We're like scrolling page after page of all the toughest races. Like, didn't know anybody was out there like this. He's our number one pick. It was awesome. It was a really cool moment. So now we're locked in, right? So yeah, so it was like 6 months of prep for the race. You have to do all sorts of, I was running a ton and then doing sauna training. He's obviously running. And my mom was helping with getting all the supplies for the crew, because in Death Valley, there's no aid stations, because like the food would go bad, the ice would melt. It's so hot. It's hard to comprehend how hot it is until you get there. But so you have to be your own crew. So you have to rent a car. It has to have certain specifications, and then you have to carry all your food, all your water, all that stuff, ice, everything. So we're planning for all that, and the race time comes. Yeah, and it's July 4th, 2023 was when it happened. So we fly out there, and man, I'll never forget. I got out of the Vegas airport. I walk outside. I'm like, holy shit, it is so hot. Like, it's the hottest I've ever felt. And we're not even in Death Valley. And it's like 6 p.m. And I was with a friend and I was joking with him because we had a white van rented. Well, it's 4th of July in Vegas, and like all the rental car companies are out of cars. And I was joking with my buddy. I'm like, watch, they pull up to pick us up and they're in like a black SUV. And we're like just laughing, walking over. And of course, a black SUV pulls up and my mom's head pops out. We're like, wait, this has to be a joke. And I saw the look on her face. She had this look of like, she thought I was going to, give her a hard time, joke with her, which I did a little bit. But yeah, and they're like, this is the only car left. So into the desert we went in our black Jeep Cherokee.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, the journey, it was amazing. We got to the hotel that night. It was 120 degrees. Like, it's hard. Like, it's just hard to explain how hot that is. But we did it. We were in it as a team. My dad was a trooper. Yeah, a lot of grit displayed through that race. The start line is at the lowest point in America, I think. It's like the Badwater Basin. It's 8 p.m. Then you run through that night. So he had to get to a checkpoint at 50 miles. That's where I picked him up. So I picked him up at like mile 40 something. We got to the checkpoint together. Then we had to go over this mountain range, and we came down into a valley. You're closing in on mile 72. Hottest I've ever felt. That was when I saw my dad was fading a little bit there. He won't admit it now, but but I remember I was like, he just looked like it was starting to get to him, the heat and everything. And we were spraying him down. You've got the the landscaping little spray devices that you might spray chemicals on. Yeah. We bought those new, and we had ice water in there. We're spraying him down. And I remember we got to mile 72. He couldn't keep anything down. Like, he couldn't keep food down, couldn't keep any liquids down. And I thought it might be over, honestly, right there. And we had set, you're allowed to stop, right? You just can't, like, you're allowed to stop and sit in air conditioning. You just can't, like, if it's an air conditioned vehicle, like, drive anywhere, because that would be cheating. So we sat him in the air conditioned vehicle, and we sat there for like an hour, just letting him rest. He was trying to get calories down. They'd come right back up. And I was just like, man, this is mile 72. We still have like 50, 60 miles to go. So, man, he got out of the car, powered up. So that moment right there, mile 72, you're starting another ascent up this mountain range called Father Crowley. And he got out of the car, started going, and onward we went. I was pretty shocked. And we had a pacer. A friend of mine came to pace, and he did a great job helping him get up there. And it's dangerous. It's like these windy car roads because it's all on road. So it's windy car roads, and you've got tired runners like falling asleep while they're walking. So the pacer, typically in that situation, you'd stay behind the runner. And if they start stumbling into the road, you grab them and pull them
Jeez.
back. And then there's cliffs you're dealing with now, because if they stumble left, there's a cliff.
Oh my God.
So you have to be really diligent about like keeping an eye on them and grabbing them. So man, Cal, he powered up that mountain. Now it's the second night. Got through the second night. And then the final ascent of the race. So you get to mile 122 and you have a half marathon straight up the Whitney portal.
Mhm.
And it's like, so I did that part with him. I did like 45 miles with him. I did maybe like 25 when I met him around 50 and went over the mountain range with him. And then I did the final, I don't know, it was about 18 or 20 miles, somewhere in there, which included this final ascent. And I remember we're sitting down at the town, we're looking up at Whitney, and I'm not saying anything because he's the one who just ran 120 some miles, and I'm looking up at this thing and I'm like, oh shit, man. Like you can just see the road weaving. And we just started one foot in front of the next. And my mom and my friend were crewing and they're stopping every 2 miles. And man, dude, he got it done. He got it done. I was crying at the finish. It was like, wow. He just was gritty, just to see like, we had talked about it for years, then what he went through to get the finish. And I'm like, holy shit, we did it. He did it, but like,
Yeah, you were very much a part of it.
It was cool that we were there together. So yeah, it was wild. Like I had all these emotions pouring out, but yeah, man, it was just such a cool moment. Such a freaking cool moment. He did it.
Has he been able to reflect upon that experience with you in any kind of way that...
Yeah. Oh yeah. We'll talk about it. He always says, we did it. We did it as a team. Myself, my mom, our other pacer. He's always downplaying his accomplishments, which it's great. He's super humble. So yeah, anytime it comes up, he also says, it wasn't that bad. And I'm like, bro, come on. Like, I saw you, man. You don't want to admit it, but the heat wasn't that bad and this wasn't that bad. And I'm like, okay, well, I wish I had video footage of some of the moments, but he did it, Cal. The grit, I think why I was emotional, like the grit I saw out there, I thought he was down and out and done a few times. And he didn't eat. He couldn't eat for the last 24 hours or more. Nothing coming in that heat with no sleep and climbing this kind of elevation. And I was just like, holy shit. Crazy. It was cool.
You said he's one and done on that one. He did it. He's good. Yeah. He's complete. Are there any other, you said he's in the mid 90s maybe on Ultra's run.
Yeah. Yeah. He's closing in on there's a pretty exclusive list of people that have run 100 mile races. So he's closing in on that. And there's some group that keeps track of it and validates all the finishes. So that's his thing. And yeah, it's a lifetime of work for him. And he's put, a ton of time and effort and commitment into it. So yeah, I hope he gets there. It's funny, as a family, we support him, but we're also like, we're careful with it.
Yeah.
Because, it's just so much time and sacrifice. And it can, like all the things we've discussed, you talked about going down the rabbit hole on health journeys and where it can be too much.
Mm-hmm.
It can be too much sometimes too.
Yeah.
But we support him in his goals for sure.
And for you, you're taking a little time off from the ultra training.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Going to take some time off and focus on, just after the experiences of the last few years, just get back to making time for personal life and kind of those 4 things that I mentioned, one of them being just embracing patience and pursuing love. And it's really hard when you're working 8 to 12 at night, grinding on a startup. And luckily, I don't have to do that.
Yeah.
That's the fortunate side of being driven and having success, is now I can take as much time off as I want forever. I won't, but I'm going to give myself this time to, just reflect and embrace patience and just have time for the important things in life, which I think have become more clear the last few years.
Yeah. Love that.
So, man.
Thanks for coming today, man.
Dude, thank you. This has been awesome, man. I love hanging with you, and I'm just so thankful for that trip we connected on, and the mountain bike ride in the morning, and what it's led to, bro. Can't thank you enough.
Likewise, many more to come.
Absolutely.
Hell yeah.